urge to uncover the secrets of Egyptian civilization goes back much further than we might think. Consider this: Cleopatra's reign is actually closer to the 21st century than it is to the age of the pyramids. That's how ancient Egypt really is. A civilization so old, so large, that even within its own timeline, its greatest moments seem impossibly far apart. And if we follow that chronology, our story of fascination with this North African culture begins in Antiquity itself. Back in the days of ancient Rome, the Romans were the first Europeans to truly fall under Egypt's spell. Their engagement was part political calculation, part cultural fascination. First Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony fell under Egypt's spell, or more precisely under Cleopatra VII, who embodied the charisma and mystique of her ancient kingdom. After Rome annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, the empire imported its symbols wholesale. Obelisks were shipped across the Mediterranean and planted in Roman squares. Coins depicted sphinxes. Egyptian art was copied and reinterpreted. Rome was not just ruling Egypt, it was displaying Egypt, announcing its control through appropriation. Religion absorbed the Nile's influence as well. Roman writers eagerly described Egyptian gods, sometimes blending them with their own pantheon. Serapis was a new hybrid deity, Osiris fused with Apis, designed to unify Egyptians and Romans under one faith. The Nile became personified as the god Nilus. Horus was depicted as a falcon-headed soldier in Roman armor, and Alexander the Great famously declared himself the divine son of Amun after visiting the oracle at Siwa. But the real superstar was Isis. Her cult traveled far beyond Egypt, spreading across the Mediterranean and deep into Europe. Pilgrims traveled to her temple at Philae, and shrines dedicated to her appear across the Greco-Roman world, from the Greek island of Delos all the way to modern-day Germany. Roman artisans crafted Egyptian-style works that were Roman at their core, but cloaked in Nile-inspired motifs. Egypt was simultaneously exotic, spiritual, and fashionable, a land to be conquered, yet also a culture to be borrowed from and reshaped. Renaissance and Enlightenment. When the Renaissance period arrived, Egypt resurfaced in European imagination, but through the ruins of Rome. Most Europeans of the 15th and 16th centuries had never set foot in Egypt, so what they knew came secondhand. They encountered Egyptian obelisks and statues that Romans had transplanted centuries earlier. Ironically, what they thought was authentic Egypt was already a Roman reinterpretation. The Renaissance elite eagerly wove Egyptian imagery into their own culture. Popes re-erected obelisks in the heart of Rome, recasting them as Christian symbols of papal supremacy, just as Roman emperors had used them to flaunt imperial power. Hieroglyphs, still undeciphered, were treated as mysterious codes, arcane symbols guarding secret wisdom. Scholars invented neo-hieroglyphs, fake alphabets that looked exotic and Egyptian, but were actually used to express European philosophical concepts. This fed into Europe's growing fascination with esotericism. Alchemists and occultists believed Egypt concealed the deepest truths of the universe. The Hermetic tradition, claiming descent from the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, was thought to be Egyptian in origin. Egypt became less a real place and more an imagined library of mystical secrets waiting to be unlocked. During the Enlightenment, Egypt's image shifted again. It was no longer just mysterious, it became revered as the cradle of law, science, and order. Philosophers praised Egypt as a fountain of civilization. Travelers on the Grand Tour, eager for cultural polish, could marvel at Egypt secondhand without ever leaving European soil. Rome's obelisks, libraries full of travelers' tales, and Egypt-inspired artworks allowed the elites to experience the Nile Valley without the hazards of the journey. Egypt had become an idea as much as a place. Napoleon's Egyptian expedition. The obsession exploded in 1798 when Napoleon Bonaparte launched his campaign in Egypt. this was more than a military venture. It was theater, propaganda, and scholarship rolled into one. France saw itself as heir to Rome, and Egypt, once a Roman province, was ripe for claiming. Militarily, Napoleon's forces were routed, but culturally, they changed Europe forever. Alongside his army, Napoleon brought more than 100 scholars, engineers, and artists. Their monumental survey, Description de, was encyclopedic in scope. Temples, plants, animals, monuments, all meticulously documented. When published, it caused a sensation across Europe. Suddenly, Egypt wasn't just a myth, it was mapped, cataloged, and illustrated in stunning detail. And then came the Rosetta Stone, a fragment of granodiorite inscribed with a decree written in 3 different scripts: ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and ancient Greek. Discovered by French soldiers in 1799, it was seized by the British after Napoleon's defeat, but proved priceless. It would take decades. But in 1822, Jean-François Champollion finally cracked the code of hieroglyphs. This moment marked the birth of modern Egyptology. What began as Napoleon's failed military adventure had reshaped Europe's imagination and laid the foundations for both Egyptomania and the science of Egyptology itself. But Egyptomania wasn't just academic, it was political. Britain and France competed fiercely for influence. By 1882, Britain had gone far beyond fascination, establishing the so-called Veiled Protectorate. Egypt, once an exotic curiosity, was now firmly in the grip of European powers. What had begun as a spectacle had now evolved into both a scientific discipline and a colonial project. The birth of modern tourism. For centuries, only kings, emperors, and the wealthy could journey to Egypt. By the late 18th century, the pattern began to shift. No longer limited to monarchs, wealthy private individuals sponsored expeditions, often driven less by science than by vanity. Gentlemen archaeologists scoured the ruins with enthusiasm but little training, producing accounts and illustrations that thrilled European audiences. In the 19th century, tourism industrialized. The British entrepreneur Thomas Cook pioneered package holidays. His company offered Nile cruises, guided tours, and comfortable itineraries that made Egypt accessible to the middle class. By the 1880s, Cook steamships virtually monopolized tourist traffic on the Nile. What had once been the preserve of pharaohs, emperors, and scholars was now packaged into an adventure for curious Europeans with disposable income. Commodifying Egypt. As tourism boomed, Egypt also became a commodity. World fairs and expositions featured elaborate Egyptian courts that dazzled visitors. Cemeteries across Europe borrowed pharaonic motifs. City squares sprouted obelisks. Museums in Paris and London raced to stockpile the most impressive collections of antiquities. But this fascination came at a cost. Egypt's heritage was plundered on a massive scale. Tomb ratings skyrocketed. Perhaps the strangest and most unsettling expression of Egyptomania was the mummy unwrapping party. Earlier centuries had already consumed mummies as medicine or ground them into a pigment called mummy brown. But in the Victorian age, the fascination became performance. Imagine it, a crowded lecture hall, the air thick with smoke and candlelight. At the center of the stage lies a genuine Egyptian mummy. A surgeon steps forward with scissors and scalpels, and as each layer of linen is peeled away, the audience leans in. Gasps erupt at the sight of amulets, charms, or the leathery remains of flesh that hadn't seen daylight in thousands of years. Sometimes these spectacles were presented as serious lectures, other times as fashionable parlor entertainment. Dinner, drinks, and polite conversation gave way to the ultimate after-dinner show. The unveiling of a body meant never to be seen again. The trend spread across Europe, from London's medical colleges to the Paris Exposition of 1867, always blurring the lines between scholarship and showmanship. For some Victorians, these events felt like thrilling glimpses into the mysteries of antiquity. For others, they were nothing short of a macabre diversion, an eerie mix of science, spectacle, and sacrilege. The more Egypt was consumed as entertainment, the easier it became to treat the past past not as heritage, but as a commodity. While academics tried to study Egypt's past, collectors, dealers, and opportunists treated it like a marketplace. Out of this frenzy grew the Gothic myth of the mummy's curse, a story that dramatized Egyptian relics as dangerous and supernatural, conveniently distracting from the real horror of colonial looting. The Discovery of Tutankhamun. The single greatest spark of Egyptomania came on November 4, 1922. Funded by Lord Carnarvon, Howard Carter peered through a hole into a sealed tomb and whispered that he saw wonderful things. He had found the resting place of Tutankhamun. Unlike most tombs, it was nearly intact, glittering with treasures untouched for over 3,000 years. In 1923, Lord Carnarvon's sudden death sparked rumors of a mummy's curse, fueling worldwide fascination with the tomb. The following year, in 1924, Carter finally reached the sarcophagus, revealing the boy king to the modern world. The Times had already secured exclusive rights to report on the excavation, and Harry Burton's meticulously staged photographs transformed the discovery into a global media spectacle. The discovery captured the world's imagination. After the horrors of World War I, people craved escapism. Tutankhamun provided it, a golden, mysterious, and seemingly eternal world revealed just as the modern age was grappling with fragility. Fashion embraced Egyptian motifs. Fashionable ladies wore flapper dresses that echoed papyrus reliefs. Bobbed hairstyles mirrored ancient queens, and Art Deco borrowed heavily from pharaonic design. Cleopatra and Isis were reimagined as icons of feminine power. Tutomania swept Europe and America alike. Yet within Egypt, Tutankhamun symbolized something deeper. The 1920s were a period of rising nationalism. For Egyptians, the boy king was not just an archaeological marvel, but a symbol of independence and continuity. Schools began teaching pharaonic history. Egyptian Egyptologists took leadership roles. Museums once run by Europeans came under Egyptian control. Tutankhamun was reclaimed as a national icon, a bridge between ancient pride and modern identity. Egyptomania reveals less about ancient Egypt than about the societies that fixated on it. For Rome, it was a mirror of imperial power. For Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, it was a stage for mystery and wisdom. For Victorians, it became both a spectacle and a commodity. And in the 20th century, Tutankhamun turned it into a global media phenomenon. But the story doesn't end with appropriation. Tutankhamun's tomb allowed Egypt to reclaim its past, transforming fascination into national pride. Egyptomania, then, is not only about Europe's obsessions, it's also about Egypt's resilience. And in some ways, Egyptomania never ended. From Hollywood epics like Cleopatra and The Mummy, to the continued global demand for Egyptian exhibitions, the fascination persists. Ancient Egypt still functions as a mirror for modern desires, whether for glamour, mystery, or power. Its legacy remains unmistakable, enduring, and ultimately its own.